Shabbat Shalom. In case you hadn't noticed, we have entered into the season of Black Friday, Giving Tuesday, shopping for holidays, and a season of gifts. In case you weren't sure about that, you might have seen the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on Thursday morning, full of wonderful acts and singing, and a rainy morning in New York that looked wonderfully cozy. But make no mistake, the message is, if you haven't already, start your holiday shopping. In the season of gift giving, there's a lot of reckoning going on with gifts and how to give them. And I do especially recommend Giving Tuesday. It's a wonderful innovation of our modern era on this coming Tuesday to make a point to give to organizations and charities that are particularly important to you. Often gifts are matched and really encouraged on this coming Tuesday. Of course, Monday is Cyber Monday, but you may enjoy that however you like. It's a lot of pressure sometimes this time of year, and you really have to kind of dig deep to think about what it means to give and receive gifts. Even if it's not really your bag, it's so much a part of this culture of consumerism and the way we demonstrate love to one another. So often is tied up with the notion of giving gifts. So just want to share a couple of thoughts about that today, particularly as relates to the Parsha. To begin there, we have two primary instances of gifts that should have been someone else's that are taken through preying on someone's vulnerability, someone's base needs, and really just by plain old-fashioned deceit. Esav is deprived of his gifts twice. His birthright through the bowl of lentil stew, and then, of course, later in the Parsha, deprived of his blessing as the firstborn through the machinations and manipulations of Rebekah and Jacob, who is not completely a willing partner, but he goes along because he honors his mother. Again, there's a lot of thought about Rebekah fulfilling prophecy. She does have a conversation with God at the beginning of the Parsha, and it seems as though this is part of the fulfillment of that forecast that she receives from the divine. But it leaves us feeling uncomfortable about gifts that are given and gifts that are taken away. Jacob and Esau will have a beautiful, touching scene of reconciliation later on in Genesis. But at this point, the usurpation of Esau's gifts leaves us with a real degree of upsettedness, and I think correctly, deep concern and compassion for Esau. So as we might think about gifts that are given and gifts that are taken, I'd like to turn today to something, again, slightly different, but that struck me as being really important to think about, especially on Thanksgiving weekend, and especially as yesterday, Friday, November 29th, is a national observance, not a holiday, but an observance of Native American Heritage Day. It concluded Native American Heritage Month, and yesterday was a particular day chosen specifically to be the day after Thanksgiving, so it moves a little bit each year, to really pause and to remember the people that lived in this land before the colonists came and before this land was carved out where other people used to live. So this is a story about gifts, and I want to especially acknowledge and thank the reporting of Julia Jacobs of the New York Times. So, a story about gifts. The Newell family had had a beaten-up suitcase for more than a century. It was passed from dusty closet to dusty closet and pulled out every now and then to show guests. They would unlatch the metal clasps and take out a fringed shirt adorned with beautiful beadwork, a weathered pair of moccasins, and an elaborate headdress that trailed eagle feathers down to the floor. Along with this suitcase was the story told by their 19th century ancestor, Major Cicero Newell, who said he had received the clothing from the well-known Lakota leader, Chief Spotted Tail, during his stint as an agent for the federal government's Indian Affairs Office, beginning in the late 1870s in what is now South Dakota. The suitcase had passed down through 5 generations, ending up in the guest room closet of Newell's great-great-grandson James, a retired salesman living in a small town in Washington state. But when it came time for James to think about passing it along again, the 6th generation had a different idea. James, now 77, recalled his son Eric asking, "Dad, why don't we try giving back this gift?" James thought about it, and there was the issue of whom they would give it back to, but they thought that could probably be worked out. It felt like the right thing to do. The Newell suitcase is part of an untold number of Native artifacts kept in attics and closets across America. A 1990 federal law set up protocols for museums and other institutions to repatriate Native human remains, funerary objects, and other cultural items. But that law doesn't cover the artifacts found in people's grandfathers' basements or in their aunts' cupboards. And as younger generations have inherited these possessions, they're more likely to have an impulse toward giving them back. Some are motivated by a sense of ethical responsibility, some by practical considerations, and some because they have less interest in the cabinet of curiosities traditions of earlier times. So Eric and his father started doing research on the old suitcase in the closet, starting with the man who had asked that it be passed down to the firstborn son of each generation. Interestingly, on our topic a little bit, it had gone to James Newell, who was a second-born son, because his older brother, who was a logger, didn't want to keep the heirlooms in his trailer in the mountains. And along with many family stories, the circumstances of how Cicero Newell came to possession of the heirlooms, it's a little ambiguous. So the Newells relied on what they had been told and what they could find online. We have a picture, actually, of the 2 original friends, we think, we hope. So a Civil War veteran from Michigan, Cicero Newell was appointed what was then called a U.S. Indian agent. He was an employee tasked with communicating between the federal government and the tribes. He was stationed in what is now reservation land of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. It was a tumultuous time. The United States government had seized the Black Hills, actually flouting the treaty that had promised tribes control over the vast Great Sioux Reservation. Newell, who wrote extensively about his time on the reservation, described how he came to admire the Lakota leaders he met. His tenure at times drew criticisms. Some thought that he was too close with officials such as Chief Spotted Tail, and one article criticized him in harsh personal terms for spreading the word about a Sundance ceremony put on by the chief. But Newell expressed a particular affection for Chief Spotted Tail, a storied tribal spokesman and negotiator who was actually shot and killed by a member of his tribe. Newell wrote that when he himself passed away, he said, "I hope that one of the first persons I meet on the other side will be my dear old friend, Spotted Tail." Now, we don't know what Chief Spotted Tail thought of Newell. It's less clear, but Newell says that he convinced Spotted Tail and other Lakota parents to send their children to a new federal boarding school out east. Now, we know from very recent reports and even ceremonies at native land that research has revealed neglect and abuse that so many children endured in those boarding schools, as well as the school's efforts to erase Indigenous students' cultures so that they would assimilate. But in 1880, the year before he died, Chief Spotted Tail traveled to the school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He himself was unhappy with the boarding school's approach to punishment and was distraught over the condition of the children. For James Newell, an idea of what to do with this suitcase began to take shape in 2020. Newell was researching for more than a year. He was on the website of the Rosebud Sioux tribe when he came upon a familiar name, John Spotted Tail, chief of staff to the tribal president. He reached him over the phone and told him about the box in his family's closet. John Spotted Tail, who is 69 years old, said, "At first I thought it was a prank call." But as he listened to the story, being explained that he was 5 generations removed from Chief Spotted Tail, he began to grow interested. Newell wanted to give the contents of the suitcase to a descendant of the Lakota chief, but was wary of driving it across the country. By the way, federal law prohibits the possession of eagle feathers without special dispensation, but the government allows exceptions for Native Americans. But Newell was worried that if he were to be stopped on the road, his possession of the headdress could land him in jail. We have a picture of the headdress. John Spotted Tail's curiosity was piqued by Newell's story. When he came home from work, he asked his wife if they had enough money to travel to Washington State. They got in the car the next morning, supplied with lunch meats and bread, and began a 1,400-mile drive to the home of a complete stranger. We were halfway there, and I looked at John and I said, "What if these people aren't real?" This was a quote from Spotted Tail's wife, whose full name is Tamara Stands and Looks Back Spotted Tail. Much more positive association with standing and looking back than Mrs. Lott of just a couple weeks ago. As soon as the couple arrived in La Center, Washington, the Newells opened the suitcase for them. In addition to the clothing, it had a bison horn and braided hair that could have belonged to a horse or a person. They looked at each other and we said, "Is this real? 144 years? We were in awe. After spending 3 days with the Newells, the Spotted Tails drove back to the Rosebud Reservation with the suitcase in the trunk of their Volkswagen Passat. There was a tribal protocol they needed to follow to determine where the belongings would end up. They consulted Lakota spiritual leaders and cultural experts and participated in a ceremony surrounding the clothing and consulted other Spotted Tail relatives. Some were skeptical. Some wanted to see the items kept with the family. John Spotted Tail favored putting them in a museum where visitors could learn about the Lakota leader. For several years, actually, he kept the suitcase in his home, but the responsibility began to weigh on him. They said it was hard to even leave home or go anywhere because they were here. So he and his wife called the South Dakota State Historical Society in Pierre, and the museum was able to convince them that they would properly preserve and display the items. The museum is less than a 2-hour drive from the reservation, which makes it accessible to local relatives who may want to visit. Now we have a picture of the descendants, I believe, standing together with the suitcase full of the items. And to this day, it's actually not totally clear how Newell and Chief Spotted Tail had met one another, and it does seem continually a little bit strange that the Lakota chief had given the one-time Indian agent such a significant gift. They couldn't find an absolute certainty of how that happened, but it was clear that the two men had crossed paths. They lived in the same area for a couple of years and navigated the conflict around the United States government's westward expansion. In May of this year, the Spotted Tails transferred the suitcase and its contents to the Historical Society. They had a ceremony involving Lakota prayers, and the heirlooms should be on display late next year. The family does believe that these two men who lived almost 150 years ago had become colleagues and then friends. And 5 generations later, the gift was returned, and now it can be shared with the world. I wonder sometimes if the gifts that we give or the gifts we give back are far, far more significant than the ones that we receive. In the season of gift giving, may our gifts be meaningful. May they be rightfully ours. And if they are not, may we work together to bring rectification, tikkun, repair. And may the gifts be given regardless of to whom and what they are, with love and joy. Shabbat Shalom.